when that first lockdown hit, that was when I really, really struggled. And like I definitely had like an eating disorder, relapse.
Missy Lancaster picked up a guitar. It was the beginning of a beautiful relationship with the Aussie instantly falling in love.
And that was pretty scary because I think that was when I realized how sick I was and my body just wasn't fighting. Yeah.
Is there a point in time where the mental health was shaken up a little bit? Is there a point in time where you look back and think, well, I nearly didn't make it through that point as an artist? G'day. Welcome back to another episode of A Lot to Talk About. Very excited to be here with someone who deserves a bloody amazing intro. Of course, I'll intro myself first. It is your host, the captain of the ship, the man in charge, Bradley J. Driver. Of course, call me Brad. And today's guest is actually someone that I had the privilege of meeting around 2 years ago now, during lockdown times down at the beach. She's an incredibly talented country music artist, nominated for 3 Golden Guitars, nominated for CMC Country Music Awards. She's actually just come from performing at the Country Music Awards up in Queensland. An incredible artist with literally tens of millions of streams on the streaming platforms that I'm sure you all know and love her from. She is currently a local of the Illawarra, but I think destined for amazing things around the world. So from your home, your car, or wherever you are, give a very warm welcome to the one, the only, Missy Lancaster.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks for having
Pleasure.
me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Like I said, we had the privilege. I always like to share first, like where I got to know the guest.
It was North Beach. It was
North
about
Beach.
7 o'clock in the morning at North Beach.
Yes, I just come out of the water.
And it was a beautiful day.
Yes.
Love
I think
that.
beautiful day in the middle of winter. I just come from a swim. Pretty sure you were having a coffee.
Yeah, we had just done like a little, look, I didn't do a swim. I'm like not much of a morning person, but I did get up and watch the sunrise. Love watching the sunrise.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And for me, it was a shock when we sat here today. It's the first time I've seen you since then.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got each other on socials, so I've been able to see what you're up to and you're doing amazing things. But I didn't realise that you live so close.
Yeah, I know. Look,
which is nice.
I'm a local, just up the road.
Which I think probably comes as a shock because you are so often around the country performing and doing the amazing things that you do. And we're going to talk about all of that today, but I love to start any pod off really with an idea of like where all of this comes from, those early years, the childhood. Yeah. And, you know, you alluded to it when we chatted off mic before, that country music has always been a part of your life. So where did you grow up and when did country music become something you presently loved?
Yeah, I think like for me, country music has always been, you know, such a big thing in my life ever since I was little. I was introduced to country music when I was about 3 years old. My mum and dad used to play it and we've always, you know, done a lot of camping, and I can just remember like all of our family holidays. My dad would like, he loves to drive. So my dad loves a road trip. So we would like, you know, all get in the car together, and that was where I fell in love with country music because we used to listen to, you know, all of these different country music albums. And I grew up in Picton, which is the closest country town to Sydney. So it was always destined that I was going to be a country girl. And I think it's just been, like an amazing thing to be able to kind of incorporate my love for country music and kind of pursue that as a career.
Would you say that you realised yourself that you were talented as a musician, or was it more so other people around you saying, hey, there's something here?
Yeah, it was like I always loved singing, and like I can remember, oh gosh, I would have been maybe like 8 years old, and I was in primary school and I was in the choir. Like, so I was like always like in the dance group, or like I wasn't a good dancer at all, but I'd like take like any opportunity that I could to like get on stage and just like have a bit of fun. And I can remember it was my cousin's 21st, and it was just like in this random hall in Campbelltown, and they had like a microphone and a speaker. And at that time, the choir was rehearsing like Where Is Love from Oliver.
Yeah.
And I got up on stage. I didn't tell anyone that I was going to do it. I got the microphone and turned it on, and I got up and started singing, like no intro, no context, just whatsoever. And everyone was like, what the hell? And saying, like, mum and dad, you know, like you might have like a little performer on your hands. And it was always something that I kind of loved, but I just never kind of imagined that I was like good enough to kind of be able to do that. I had always watched, you know, all the other people that I went to school with and things like that. And I was like, oh, like they're all better than me, you know, like, so I love to like be a part of it, but I never kind of saw myself as being like a lead kind of person. And then when I got a bit older, I started entering talent quests and writing songs and things like that. And, you know, I kind of like started winning and things like that. And I'm like,
starts to confirm a little bit of what
and
you
I'm
may
like,
have thought.
Maybe like I can do this. And, you know, it all kind of started like I was playing at a pub in Tamworth, and that was when, you know, I signed like with my first manager, and literally I'd like come off stage and he was like, hi, like, you know, I'm a manager in country music. I think that you're really good. I'd love to have a meeting with you. And then it kind of all just went from there. And I'm like, okay, all right, looks like I'm doing it.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Like sometimes we don't realize how talented we are until you get that outside confirmation.
Yeah.
For you, like, it sounds like this has come very naturally for you. It was like just an instinct to go out there for some reason and sing and perform on stage.
Yeah.
At what point in your life did you really start to go, okay, I actually want to get better at this, and I want to start to, like, did you ever have a teacher? Like, you obviously play guitar really well as well.
Oh, thank you. See, guitar was kind of like something that I picked up like as like an artist. I'm like, I feel like I don't play guitar well at all, but I think that's because, you know, I'm just around so many musicians and things like that. But, you know, I always had singing lessons and things like that. And I think when I was maybe 20, that was when, I had signed with my first manager because I had left school and like pursued like a teaching degree.
Yeah,
so
wow.
I was like, I'm going to be a primary school teacher. You know, this is what I'm going to do. And I started playing in bars when I was like 15 years old. Yeah. And it's funny because when I was younger, I used to look a lot older than what I was. So I would like get dressed up and like just go into pubs and be like, hi, like, here's my card. Like, you know, like I'm a singer, like blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And they would kind of book me and no one ever checked for my ID. So I'd be like in the pub on a Friday night when I was like 16, like playing gigs to like all these drunk, rowdy people. So I feel like I always knew how to entertain, if that makes sense. But it was never, you know, that was never kind of my end goal. I just did it because I loved it. And I thought, you know, if I can make a bit of money off this, then, you know, great. And it was good because like I was earning really good money when I was in year 12 and everyone was kind of, you know, working like these side jobs that they hated and going to school, where I was kind of playing like 2-3 gigs every weekend. But yeah, it was when, you know, I signed with my first manager and I was like, okay, like we're going to Nashville. Okay. Like, I think I'm just gonna give the teaching away. And yeah, I did that and haven't looked back.
It's amazing. I have to ask, you know, being at that age, performing live, I think in this current age, like had you have been 20 right now in 2022, you know, probably would have been on social media performing. Where because of the time, like the natural instinct is go into a pub and perform in front of a live audience. Yeah. How much do you think that decision has helped you now as a performer in actually navigating like the confidence on stage and just naturally feeling like it's a part of who you are when you get up and perform? Yeah,
I think for me, I know like a lot of other artists have kind of just been signed and they don't have any performing experience or any ideas of like how the ins and outs work of like putting on a show and actually entertaining and things like that. So I think for me, I kind of learned the hard way of like entertaining people in a pub that are drunk, that are like absolute hard asses. Like if you're not singing well, they'll tell you. So that was kind of how I learned to entertain. And, you know, I think that's really the best way that you can learn. You can research all you want on how to be the best performer, how to do it best. But I think the most important thing is actually doing the work and
For sure.
learning, you know, your right time to like, you know, I would be like 21 and I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to test this now. Now I've got like the crowd's attention after singing covers for however long. This is a song I wrote, blah, blah, blah. And if you've got the crowd listening, then that's the time, you know,
For
to
sure.
like push the original thing. So I think, you know, that was good for me to be able to learn, you know, just certain times when you're on stage, if it's okay to like go off script a little bit or stick to the show. I think it's really important.
You know, it's funny when somebody in your space as a creative, as an artist, decides to take that first leap of faith. You know, there's definitely, I guess, a little bit of doubt that's naturally going to come from people who don't know you. Would you say that as a kid you were a bit of a dreamer? And if you could kind of explain your childhood and the relationship with your parents, were they super supportive of you walking away from, you know, because a lot of parents freak out. You step away from a job,
My
you step away from
parents
education.
Still freak out.
Yeah.
Like literally. And because, you know, like my mum and dad had like a joinery business. I'm from like a family of coal miners. So for me doing music, it's like such a like foreign thing in my family. And it's funny, you know, because in saying that, I've got 3 cousins that are professional golfers. So one lives in America and the other 2 live in China. So it's really, we've got like a really interesting, kind of thing happening in our family, but I'm the only person that's kind of done music, and my parents were definitely really scared. And I think, you know, they still worry about me because they see, you know, I'm not going to like sugarcoat it. Like music industry is really, really hard, and you do have to be mentally strong. And I think that's the stuff that you don't see. You don't see the behind the scenes stuff. And when you first start out and you get a big break, it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And like, all these people love me and like, woohoo. Like it's going to be great. You think it's all going to be, you know, sunshine and lollipops. And I think it's when you kind of get to like the middle stage of the career where it's like, if you've had like one hit or a bit of success, you then have to, you know, keep that going. And I think that's probably the hardest thing. And I have so much respect for the people that just really power through it, like regardless of, you know, how hard it gets at times.
Would you say that obviously it's a huge confidence booster when a manager in Tamworth comes up and says, hey, like you've got a really special talent for country music, I'd love to sign you. That boosts the confidence. Does it somewhat make you a little bit naive that it's all going to be easy from then on?
Well, when that happened, I was like, me? I was like, what? Like, really? Like, so I was kind of blown away. And then, you know, when he told me, you know, that he actually managed like the artists that I have listened to for my whole career, that was definitely like a crazy thing. So I was like, oh my God, I'm just like such a fangirl, like really. But yeah, like I learned pretty early on that it was going to be hard.
What would you say was the first moment that it kind of hit you and you thought this is going to be a real struggle to make it to where I want to go?
Oh, that's hard. Probably, I would actually have to say it was the 2016 Toyota Star Maker year. And I can remember it's, you know, this big competition that they have in Tamworth, and it's basically for like the emerging, you know, country music artists. And there was so much, you know, hype around it, and I was in the top 3, and I didn't win, and that was like really soul destroying at the time because I was like, I've worked so hard all week for this, but you know, I didn't win, and then I ended up, you know, signing my first record deal like a couple of weeks later. So then I was like, okay, like this is fine, like it's all good. But I think, you know, there are things that really knock you down, and then, you know, there'll be something else that comes along and you're like, okay, like that didn't work out, so now I need to find a different route, if that makes sense. Yeah, for
sure. Because, you know, we spoke about it before off mic that when you love anything or anyone, or you have hopes or dreams in this world, then you're susceptible to pain. And that pain as a creative, as an artist, is ever so present when
Oh my gosh.
life definitely punches you in the face at points in time. Like I remember, spoken about it before once or twice on the show, I remember leaving my former career, starting a podcast and thinking, fuck, give me a year and I'll be like Rogan. I'll be the biggest star in the world. Like this will be a #1 podcast. Fuck, so naive of me. But I look back on that and I think, well, I'm so incredibly lucky and I'm so blessed that I found what I love, because for all of the hardships I was able to have a reason, a real why as to why I wanted to keep moving forward. But I think where people maybe go wrong is they think that the path to stardom or success, that the final destination will be more rewarding than the process, and they don't actually love the art. But you love this.
And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, you can see straight through, or I know I can see straight through an artist that doesn't love what they do. You can see it, you know, like in the person's eyes when they're on stage. And like, you know, I've always, like, I genuinely love country music. I live and breathe it. So, you know, like, I'm just as happy to be a punter out in the crowd watching country music as I am being on stage, because I just have a love for music. So I think the music always has to come first, because if the passion's not there, you're just going to give up.
No passion, no point.
Straight away, exactly.
You know, you just touched on something there, like you're happy to be the punter in the crowd. And I've definitely noticed that on your stories and like socials. Yeah, you're out there having a good time when you're, you know, when your time to perform is up. How important do you think it is as someone who creates, and, you know, music is something that is really intimate for people, right? Whether someone's going through a tough time or they want to be uplifted or they're there enjoying a moment or memory with friends and family, everyone turns to music. Like, music is such a foundational part of the lives that we all lead. And I think, from my perspective, that being a punter and someone who celebrates music would make it easier to create meaningful art.
Yeah, and I think it is really important to, you know, to actually go out and like and watch the music, because I think you forget when you're always on the other side of it, you forget what it feels like. And it is a very different like experience. I know that being on stage, you know, sometimes you have days where you're like, I don't know, like if that like translated well, because sometimes, you know, at these gigs, you're up on a big screen and there might be 20,000 people there watching you, but they're all like scattered. So you don't have that super like intimate thing like how me and you are speaking right now. Yeah. It's hard to kind of like make eye contact with people and things like that. And then it's like when you go out into the crowd or watch it back, you're like, oh, okay, no, that did translate well. So I think, you know, it kind of, to go back out and like be a punter, you kind of remember why you do what you do. And I think it's just, you know, it gives you more to write about, if that makes sense. From like a creative perspective, it's about, you know, going out and like experiencing things and then creating music from it. Because if you're always just on the other side of it, you know, like you perform and then you go off stage and then you just go straight home to bed. For me personally, I'm like, I know I should do that more, but for me personally, I need to be able to, you know, be energetic and interact with people, and, you know, and really live my life to be able to create music. Otherwise, if I don't kind of do that, if you lose why you started it in the first place, then the music's not real. It loses that organicness.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think probably in the last couple of years it's become, I think social's probably helped with this. We've started to see behind the scenes of music a little bit more. And I would say I was probably naive enough until the last few years to almost think that artists wrote their own music all the time. And I think one thing that is super impressive with you, and probably the thing that impresses me the most as someone who loves being creative and telling stories, is that you write a lot of music, not just for yourself, but for other people.
Thank you.
When you're in that process, my pleasure, like, is there a standard process for you that you go through to write? Do you feel like, is it more disciplined? I know there's artists who'll sit down every day and write for writing's sake, just to get better at it? Or for you, is it more that moment of divine inspiration comes through and you're like, now we're using it?
It's definitely like the moment. Like sometimes I'll just be sitting down and having a conversation with someone and someone will say something and I'm like, that's a great song idea. Or like I'll say something and I'm like, how can I twist that? In saying that, like, you know, when you do these writing trips and, you know, when you go into songwriting sessions, like they're all planned and there are, you know, writers that work every day, Monday to Friday. And when you go to work, you go and write songs. I think it just kind of depends on the person. I know for me, some days like I'll get into a session and, you know, it's like, okay, today I'm going to write a song about this. And then I get in there and say if I've had a terrible morning or if something's happened, sometimes, you know, you go into the session and then the other writer will be like, how's your morning going? And you're like, oh my God, this just happened and like blah, 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 blah. And then that sparks something like some kind of like inspiration. And then you go, okay, we're going to write a song about that.
Yeah.
I think it's just about working out what is going to flow the easiest and what is real to you in that moment rather than just trying to, you know, get something out for the sake of it that's going to be a bit half-assed. I'd rather just be like, I'm having a terrible day. I just need to write a sad song, get it out of my system, and then like, cool, we can keep writing boat songs. But I think, it is just important to, I think, be real in your songs. And like we were saying before, you know, if you're being really honest and being really vulnerable, chances are, you know, the other people are going to feel that too. Because I think,
definitely,
you know, as an artist, and I know I've been through it, like I go, oh gosh, I feel like that's too intense to like say in a song. But then I have a moment where I go, we're all human at the end of the day. I'm sure I'm not the only person that has felt like this. So maybe it's not such a crazy thing to open up and be that vulnerable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And it's, you know, it's a fine line though, isn't it? Because we see artists who are so tortured in their personal life and you can see that their music is a reflection of that. But whilst it creates beautiful art, it sometimes can be the tug of war that is lost with who you are as a human being.
Oh my God, yes.
You know, and that's such a challenge. So how do you separate it?
Oh my God, that is like, it's such a thing because like, I don't know, I feel like there's artists that just like really stay in that like super deep, like emotional kind of level of songwriting. And it's like, it's beautiful and it's tragic at the same time. And I know, you know, there's certain things that like I've been through in my life where I'm like, oh my God, it was awful and like soul destroying. But I also wrote a lot of good music during that times, you know, where I could be super vulnerable and just feel what I needed to feel, and it really translated. But I think sometimes as the artist and the writer, you do need to put your own mental health first. And just sometimes, you know, look after yourself. Have a few months where you kind of reflect. Don't get me wrong, write all the sad songs. But then I think it's good to like, once you've written the sad songs, then pick yourself up. And power on.
Because I almost find that looking from the outside in, it happens in this world too with, you know, people who become podcast hosts or speakers or, you know, they like to talk on certain topics. It almost from the outside in can look as though they're looking for pain. Like, because usually when you experience pain, you know, one of the quotes that I love is pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice.
Yep.
And I always say choose your suffering wisely. There's a difference between suffering for the sake of suffering and sacrificing for the greater good of, you know, relieving yourself from future pain. But I look at some artists or creatively geared people and they recognize pain, but instead of looking for answers, they look to replicate it because they feel like it's good for art. And
it is, don't get me wrong, great for art, but, you know, I think it is important to like, just not stay in it. Stay in it all the time. And I think, you know, musically, you kind of have to have different chapters. And I think, you know, if you are going through a really hard time, it's great to delve into that world, but you know, it's all about the journey of it. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Would you say that there's things that have become almost routine or discipline to keep your mental health in check, to keep you in a really good place so that you can go into those zones and write that music and get super vulnerable, emotional, be really honest with, you know, your listeners and your fans, but at the same point keep you in check?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was coming into the music industry. Like, I'm like a very naive person and like I always have been, where I'm like, I love everyone, and like, you know, like people, you know, will be really nice to your face and then say really, really mean things about you. And I think what I struggle with the most in music is like being a young female, and like I was just like, I was a little girl basically when I started. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was just doing my best because I loved music. I was just trying to put myself out there, and you know, there were a lot of people that didn't like me, and I took it so personally because I was like, why do these people not like me? Like, I've like been nice to them, and I just like really took that on board. And I think, you know, you learn very quickly that music is cutthroat, and at the end of the day, it's actually not about you or how good of a person you are or how nice you are. It's purely about the performance kind of side of things, and so much of it is like, you know, what you wear on stage, or like, you know, just quite
so many moving parts, right?
Materialistic kind of things. And I always took it on board, and it used to really affect my mental health because I was like, you know, oh, people don't like me, like I should just give up, you know, blah blah blah. So I think it's, you know, I'm very strong now in knowing that, like, you know, I have my personal life, and then I have music, and I need to be able to separate the two. And if I do a bad performance, or if I do something wrong, or go, okay, like, shouldn't have done that, that was a bad idea, next time I need to do it more like this. I think it's being able to go home, being able to take it on board, and then go, okay, that was a bad day at work. Now I need to like watch some Netflix, or, you know, go back to like being the normal me, and not beat yourself up. And I think that is the hardest thing about music, is being able to separate the two. And like, just because you had a bad show, or you didn't sing as well as you normally do, doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's just a bad day at work, if that makes sense.
It does. You know, you spoke about, well, everything you touched on there sounds like a lot of maturity and wisdom. And I think time only allows that to develop.
Yeah.
Is there a point in time where the mental health was shaken up a little bit? Is there a point in time where you look back and think, well, I nearly didn't make it through that point as an artist?
Yeah, I think probably like I was diagnosed with anorexia when I was just 17. I can remember it was actually my 17th birthday. And at that time, and I don't even know kind of like how it came on. I just, you know, I think I was just in that process of like growing up, and I didn't know kind of what I wanted to do. I always loved music, but I felt like I needed to go to uni and things like that. And, you know, I think for me, it was just a huge thing of like control, and my eating disorder was something that I could control. And that was when I was admitted into the adolescent medicine ward at Westmead Hospital, and I was under there until I think it was just past my 21st birthday. And after that, that was when I got signed, and all the music stuff just took completely off. And I was like, yep, I'm good. Like, this doesn't exist anymore, this eating disorder thing. And I stopped doing, you know, the little things that used to help me, because I was so wrapped up in music, because there was so much, you know, good stuff happening and things like that. And definitely when that first lockdown hit, that was when I really, really struggled. And like, I definitely had like an eating disorder relapse, because, you know, I had gone from like being on the road every weekend and always doing something. Like I'm like a very like busy person. So I'm doing something all the time and I don't sit down and just like chill much.
Last few days, great example.
Which I need to do more. So I think, you know, being forced to like just sit still and it was just the unknowing of like when stuff was going to go back to normal. And I know that I'm not the only person that felt like that. And I feel like we were forced to sit with ourselves and it was like, oh God, like all your deepest, darkest problems kind of come to the surface when you don't have that escape route of being busy and being able to, you know, concentrate on other things. So for me, I was definitely like just forced, like I had to sit with it and be like, this is awful. You know, and I definitely really struggled with that. And I think, you know, even when we came out of lockdown, things went back to normal, but not for us. We were still out of work. And there were times where I'm like, I don't know why I do this. Why would I bother putting so much time and energy into writing songs and doing all of this stuff for music when we can't even perform and just not even knowing? Like a no singing and dancing rule. I'm sorry, but like we can have 80,000 people at the football screaming.
Yeah, but you can't stand up at a pub.
But you can't sing. Like, come on. Like, what an absolute joke.
It's almost like the aftershock of the earthquake, right? Like there's the moment that it's happening and then for that industry in particular, it kind of remained to be an issue.
Yep.
You know, it's interesting hearing you say that because that's obviously the time that we met. And I think it speaks to the simple fact that what looks always like loving and positive and happy on the surface isn't always the situation inside the mind.
Yep.
You know, one thing that I found in lockdown is I probably thrived in those 2 years because just prior to that I was forced into a situation where I was probably unhappy for 6 months prior to lockdown with my work situation. I think a couple years of feeling really at a loss with who I was and really questioning where my place was in the world and what life was meant to mean for me forced me to figure out who I was. And so I feel as lockdown began, I had a real grasp of who I was, and it was like almost a period of enlightening, sort of like enlightenment, where it was like, oh, I actually get to focus on these things I've figured out about myself now.
Yep.
And I would actually describe that 2 years as the best 2 years of my life thus far.
It's very interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting, but and I literally wrote about this just the other day, I can see how on the flip side of the coin, where life has provided smoke and mirrors, you head into this space where all of a sudden, all of the things that you used to seek validation in or you used to find meaning in are now taken away from you.
Oh, yeah.
Then you're just you in the mirror. It's who the fuck am I?
Oh, yeah.
And how do I navigate this process? So when you feel that, when you first recognize that that's becoming an issue and that something I need to solve, like what do you go to?
I definitely just need to like take a step back from everything. And I know I'm such like an overworker and I feel like I'm a huge perfectionist. So I'm like, if I do something like I really want to do it well, I'll try my absolute hardest. And, you know, I'm just kind of someone that's like never said no. You know, if someone says, oh, you know, do you want to come write a song? I'm like, yeah, okay. I've got like a 50-hour working week, but sure, I'll come and write a song. So I think for me, it's important to definitely take a step back from the music industry because, like having that background with an eating disorder, I think I lived in denial for so long where I was like, nope, like everything's fine. It's all good. And I definitely had that realization in lockdown as like, okay, I can now see that this is something that is never going to go away. And I think people try to be encouraging and people say, you know, you can make it through anything and like, you know, you can recover, you know, through anything. But I think for me, it was like, that's just like palming it off. Like I'm not actually dealing with it. I have an unrealistic like idea in my head if I think that this isn't going to be something that I'm always going to have to deal with. So right now in my life, I need to, take steps to really look after my mental health and just know that like it is always going to be there. And I know that, other eating disorder sufferers, people that have been through it, always say the same thing. And I think it's just learning how to manage it.
I couldn't have said that better myself. As someone who's not experienced that and that challenge in life, I can say that I've experienced a few challenges, and I would say that there's this idea that when you've found an answer to a question you've been trying to solve,
it's done.
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah. It fades away. I think it's the same with courage, and a lot of what you're talking about is having the courage to face challenges head on.
Even though you're like, oh my God, this is...
Yeah.
And most of the time I'm like, no. I don't want to deal with that.
The simple fact is that fear is the act. Look, it's recognizing fear, and courage is the act of acting in spite of fear.
Yeah.
And there's this idea that you just alluded to that once you're what you would consider courageous, or once you've developed courage, that all fear diminishes. And it's not the case.
Oh, no way.
Because fear will always be there, or challenges and adversity will always be there. It's just knowing that you have the tools necessary to deal with it better next time.
Yeah.
Or to find your feet again.
And I think it is like really interesting, just like touching on what you just said, because, what would have triggered me when I was 17 wouldn't trigger me now. But then there's all these new things, that like when you move up in your career and when you move on with life and you take on new responsibilities, there's always going to be something new that's going to trigger you. So it is about, finding out how to be strong mentally and just to be able to move through it, I guess.
And it almost feels as though if you don't get comfortable with that idea, you'd almost halt the progress of your career, because a part of knowing that you're going to evolve and grow in this space is accepting the fact that new things will challenge you, but new adversity will come. Mm-hmm. I have to ask, you've spoken about all of this here, and I look at, we've touched on a little bit in our pre-conversation how the worlds of people who are working as athletes or creatives or artists are somewhat outside of that 9-to-5 box. But I look at athletes and I think, I'm a big boxing fan. And I love listening to boxers talk about their routine and their training, and I love watching it. And I was listening to a couple of boxers the other day on a podcast, and they were talking about how boxing has provided a structure and a routine and a sense of discipline to their life that is almost even post-career essential to keep, because it gives them direction. It's like that discipline gives them freedom. Yeah. And for a lot of them, it's without discipline, they find their life starts to fall apart. But I look at art and I look at your industry and there isn't a sense of routine.
There's no routine. And like, you have to be okay with not having a routine. And like sometimes like I've always been a very like go with the flow person. Like, if I get really bored with routine, I'm like, I can't do the same week again. Like, the idea of like going and sitting in an office Monday to Friday and doing something that I hate and don't care about. Like, I'm not going to do that job well. I'm not the girl for that job because it's just not my passion.
And some people love that security. Some people love that consistency. I'm similar to you where I need a fresh sense of like what the next day could look like. Yeah. But I have to ask the question, because even with my weeks looking different week to week and my days are always different, I still have a sense of like, I wake up at 4:45 and the first thing I do is like in 95% of occasions is like go for a run or go to the gym or go do something. Have you found any disciplines or routines in your life that allow the manic nature of like unpredictability to feel somewhat comfortable?
Yeah, I think like for me, I'm such a weirdo, and like if we're like ever away like on tour or whatever, or like my phone's dead or something, I'm like a huge like meditation person. And every night when I go to sleep, I need to listen to my meditation. So I have like white noise that I play. I'm like a little baby that just like drifts off to sleep. Or I listen to like sleep stories and things like that. And people will be like, like, what the hell are you listening to? Like I woke up and I could like hear a man talking and I'm like, oh yeah, like that's just on my phone. That was just my sleep story.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely like my meditation at night. I'm like, I need my earplugs mainly because my fiance snores, snores his head off. So I'm like, I need my earplugs. And I love my morning coffee.
And I think that's the thing.
Ever.
People try to overcomplicate routine. It can be so simple.
Yeah.
It's just the thing that kind of like clicks you into gear, or the thing that allows you to settle.
Yeah.
And it's funny you talk about white noise. I took a solo trip to Port Douglas at the start of the year.
Oh my God, how good is Port Douglas?
So good.
I love
so
that
beautiful.
place.
And it was actually one of my favorite periods of the year. Like I felt like going into Port Douglas, there were some things that were like frustrating me in my life at the time and things I needed to figure out about myself. And I went there and I come out of that 10 days so relaxed.
Oh yeah.
So much, I made so much sense and had shone so much light on my situation and where I was at in my life that I come back very clear. And one thing that I found was it was kind of weird because it was the first time in a while that I was going to bed like just knowing that for like the next 10 days there was nothing
that you had to do.
Nothing I had to do. It was weird. But that almost like sat a little odd with me.
Yeah.
That I was like, how do I go to sleep if like there's no reason to like
go to
sleep right now? And so I clicked on, I found white noise and I found best. Like, it was like this podcast. It was like it had the most monotone thing. It was like, welcome to like the 8 Hour Sleep podcast. And like, it was 8 hours of just rolling nature noises and white noise.
I love that.
And I've never slept better in my life. I slept like a baby.
Yeah. And
it's so good.
It's funny, like even when I'm home, like if I'm like feeling a little bit stressed or whatever, or even like, I don't know, cooking dinner or just doing random things. If it's not country music, I know that this is really weird as well. I like love listening to like Hawaiian music.
Oh, really?
It's just like, it makes me feel so relaxed and it's just so like, I don't know, it just makes me feel like I'm in Hawaii. So I just put it on and I'm like, I feel much better now. Or if I'm like, I don't know, in a bit of a bad mood or something, I just chuck on some Hawaiian music and I'm like, okay. I'm like, yeah, I'm good
It is
now.
very calming.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. My go-to, which, I would say I've never really like put it on in the car, or I've never put it on to work out, or when I'm just like vibing around. But my go-to of a night is the cinematic orchestra.
Oh my God. So, really? Yeah. I feel like that's so intense.
It is, but it somewhat calms me. I think it puts me into a good dreaming state.
Oh God, I can't imagine what my dreams would be like.
Like it. Maybe it's the storyteller in me, but it's like that, like To Build a Home, like that song, The Arrival of the Birds. Like it's so odd. It's so odd, but I just need like 10 minutes of it. And I feel so relaxed.
See, if I was like listening to that, my dreams would be like me like in a wild like car chase driving off a cliff or like something like that.
I think that's the storyteller in me. Like it wants to dream something bold. It wants to dream something big. So
I need to stop dreaming because I just like live in the clouds 24/7. Like I think just being so artistic that my brain's like, woo, like literally all the time. And it's funny because on my sleep app, it's so strange. I don't know what one you have, but on my sleep app, there's like all the different noises that you can listen to. And there's like white noise, there's brown noise. I'm like, oh, interesting. Yeah. Anyway, and then there's all these other things that you can listen to, like the noise of like a fan or like the noise of like a burnout. Like there's all these random things.
Wow.
And one of them is like someone chewing a cucumber. And I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, that's a very strange thing. Like,
imagine being the person recording that in the studio. Like, what's this for? Oh, it's for the sleep app.
I'm just like, what the hell? Like, that's such a strange thing. I forget where I was going with this.
I don't know, but we've gone on a tangent, haven't we? Oh, routines.
Oh, yeah. And I get a notification every night at 11 p.m. And it's like always when I'm like in the middle of like my Netflix binge. Yeah. I think because like, we work so late as musos. When I come home, I'm like, okay, now like everyone's asleep. This is my time to like just chill. I can watch Netflix, be uninterrupted. And I get like this little notification from like the sleep app saying like, it's bedtime. Have you ever tried to compose your own sleep melodies? And I'm like, yes, all the time. I'm like, I need my sleep app to like help me wind down so I'm not just constantly composing melodies.
Thinking about work. Maybe it needs to change its alert.
Oh, yeah.
I'm really interested as to, you know, you've had some real hits and
thanks.
Like, and you were so talented. And here's, you know, something I said to you before was, I wouldn't say I've got a favorite style of music. Like I float in and out of different styles, and I appreciate lyrics and thought and the creation of music. And I appreciate the skill or the talent that's required to perform it the way that it's performed, more so than the genre itself. So I feel that I really drift between different genres of music. But you've created hits and written hits, and you know,
love this for me. Thank you.
This is I'm just
I'm like,
pumping you up
really?
here.
I'm like,
sit back and enjoy this for a moment. You know? Would you say that? I think there's maybe some misconception from the world outside, and you know, I've been lucky enough to interview a few artists before yourself, who explain that it's not as simple as making one hit song and then life is figured out and solved and sorted. You know, you've written songs that have like over 15 million streams. What is the reality of that like? How does that feel from the positive side of things and the buzz you get from it? Does it stress you out more so that now I've got to write another hit? Like, explain the feeling.
It's really interesting because I have times where I'm writing songs and I'm like, oh my God, like this is the best song ever. Like I absolutely love this song. And it can like get pitched around and everyone's like, like, no, not really. Like, not really a vibe. And then it'll be the song that I'm like least excited about that ends up being the song that does well. So that's like a really interesting thing for me as like a writer, I guess. So I think for my, you know, my solo career, I'm like, I have to roll with the songs that mean the most to me, that reflect my journey and what I've been through in like the last 2 years. And I think just being really like real and open about what that journey has been like. And I know that it's like, oh, you know, we can record this song. Like you might have two great songs. And it's like, oh, you know, this song is going to work really well in a live show for people that don't know you because it's catchy. Yeah. But then it's like, I think when people actually sit down and listen to the music, I'm like, the other song's more touching. And I want to be the kind of artist that, you know, people, when they're having like a really bad day or if they're really upset, you know, that they can like turn on my music and feel like they're being heard, if that kind of makes sense. Sure. So I think as an artist, it's about navigating between like the party and the drinking songs and then like, you know, the times where you're just like having a really bad day. And I think it's trying to incorporate all of that into like a chapter and going, okay, like what does this album reflect? Where do I want to go with it? What is the main message that I'm trying to send to the listener? Like what is the message of this kind of album? And then I think you structure, you know, your songs kind of around that and telling the story from like started here, then I went to here and then it went a bit down, then it went up again. And then I fell in love and like la 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 la. You know what I mean? It's kind of telling the story like that. And then with the other, you know, writing songs for other artists, it's like most of the time it's like this is what the artist is looking for. They need like an upbeat party song about a boat or something like that. And then I go in and go, okay, blah, 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 blah. And then you just kind of make it up as you go.
It's funny that you said there, and this maybe surprises me a little bit. You spoke about creating a body of work for an album. Would you say that maybe that's a little less of the focus now for artists because a lot of it is about the single?
100%. And I think, you know, streaming has really changed, you know, the way that we write and release music now, which, you know, I struggle with because I'm such an album person and I always have been. And even like these days, like I don't really listen to like playlists as such. I love listening to an artist and listening to the album from start to finish. Maybe that's just because I'm super artistic. But yeah, it's definitely changed a lot, because now what's happening is, you know, it basically costs the same if you've got 12 songs, if you've released 12 songs at one time in comparison to releasing 12 singles. That's the same amount of money that's being spent.
Yeah.
And the album comes and goes like that. Whereas with the 12 singles, you know, there's always something fresh there that's getting picked up on Spotify and Apple Music and things like that. And it's definitely a big thing with, like, you know, your monthly listeners. If the album comes out at once, then people will listen to it for like a month, then it dies down. Whereas if you've got those continuous singles and keeping your songs in playlists every single month, then that's going to give your monthly listeners, you know, a big turnover, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Because I just noticed now, I can't remember who I was listening to the other day, but one of my favourite podcasts, which is, it's so weird because I'm not musically talented or inclined at all. I think most people who listen to this have probably heard me sing on the podcast before.
Oh, I love that. Can you sing now?
I'm not actually any good. Actually, not on this podcast. I don't know if you've seen, I've shared some clips from my time on the podcast with Taku.
Yep.
When we had Top Deck. And we quite often like to kick it off with like a bit of a romantic song, or finish it off with a romantic song. And
Are you going to sing a song?
I'm not going to sing a song here today, not in front of you, no.
I'm like, I can't, because I have no voice.
Yeah, I'm not going to test it in front of you. But
No
I find that, you know, one of my favourite podcasts is Zane Lowe's podcast. And I love how he understands music. And I think I just love listening to creative people. So I love listening to artists talk about making an album, or, you know, what they're doing and how they get into their zone to write or to perform or whatever. And, you know, that he was interviewing someone the other day, and they'd spoken about the fact that for like the first 5 years of their really viral career, they'd never written an album. They'd always released singles. And I was like, that's so different. That sounds so foreign to what the foundation of music was built on.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's why I asked that question, because it feels like the industry is changing a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, just with social media and TikTok and all that kind of stuff, it's like, you know, you have moments of like going viral, like with a song, but it's for 24 hours. It's kind of not like sustainable, if that kind of makes sense. So it's just such a fast-paced, quick environment now, where people, you know, are just kind of making content for the sake of it, just to get it out. And I do think that we're losing, you know, why we wrote songs in the first place. I think it is really good, like, just as an artist, to go back to the old way. My manager always tells me that I'm too old school, but I love the old way of being like, okay, just having like a couple of weeks away from social media and the industry and things like that, going back to like doing you, processing whatever's going on in your life, and then coming out with, you know, a fresh perspective. Because I think you can write things, you can write the messy things when you're in the middle of it, and then you can just leave it all, go away for a few weeks, think about it, and then come back with like a fresh perspective of like, okay, now I can tell the story, if that makes sense. And I think it's about, finding the right way to like tell the story, if that makes sense. Just having it from, you know, telling the story from like a different perspective, you know, and I think that we all kind of have different experiences. And I think that, like we were saying about before, when you're an empath and when you're a creative, you do feel, you know, so much of like other people's stuff. So I know for me, like I'll always like sit down and listen to someone's story, because I'm like, that's a really like interesting way of telling the story. I've never heard it, you know, be told like that before. And, you know, for me as like a songwriter on my next album that I've got coming, I feel like my first album was a lot of like, I'm in love, now I've had my heart broken, and like, oh, now I'm back in love, or like now I'm nostalgic, or now I'm reminiscing. And with this this new album, you know, I had a moment in my life where, you know, two people that were really, really close to me had been cheated on and things like that. And I wasn't in the relationship, but I saw the pain that came with, you know, having a marriage breakup and all that kind of stuff. So for me as an outsider, I was looking and going, okay, it's my job to tell the story of what has happened, not to be the, what's the word? The character.
Yeah.
In it. Does that make sense?
It's almost translating for the audience.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to just sit back and just kind of watch, observe and listen. And I think that's just as big of a thing. Obviously you've got to feel all your feelings and do all that stuff, but it is good to just sometimes sit back, say nothing and watch and then create.
It's so true. Well, I feel like there's a world of problems and challenges happening around us, and it doesn't always take... I actually had a conversation with a mate about this the other day, who's about to go off and do some really, really cool stuff. And, you know, he said, sometimes I feel a little bit privileged because I haven't had any real challenges that have shaken me as a human being yet. And I said, but you don't always have to be the person who's in the face of adversity or in the face of pain. Sometimes you've got a solution that you know will help other people with their problems, and that's all that you need.
Yeah.
You just need to have, like, if you're an empathetic person, as we spoke about, then, sometimes you just got to have the genuine intention to help, and that's well enough.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I just like love anybody that, you know, goes out of their way to do like nice things for people. Like I remember I was at like the petrol station. Oh, this was like a really random story. I was filling my car up one day and I can't remember what was going on, but this man just paid for my fuel for no reason.
Nice, yeah.
No reason at all. And like, it was just the nicest thing ever. I was like, oh my God. And then I think like the power of giving is like, it's so important and so powerful, because you do one thing for someone that's having a bad day, that's going to make them feel a little bit happier about themselves, which means that they're going to be nicer to the next person that they meet. And there's such a flow-on effect from it. And I just love it.
Well, you know, there's something that I was writing about recently, and I hate to bring this back to my keynote. It sounds like I'm really...
No, I love
I'm really
it.
pitching myself here. If anyone wants to bloody book me to speak on stage, let us know. I was writing in my keynote about one of, I think, the biggest and most important topics for us to understand and grasp in life is, you know, discovery of purpose. And I think it's less discovery, it's more crafting. And I was writing about how a big part of crafting a purpose is, and, you know, anyone who listened to the last podcast would have heard this, you know, my soloette, but there's two ways that I look at purpose. There's a lady, she's a wonderful speaker, an incredible psychologist, Mel Robbins, and she seems to think that we all have the same purpose in life. And she describes what she thinks the human being's purpose to be is to be the truest version of yourself and be seen as that. And I tend to agree with her on one hand, but then I think what she's really getting to is that your purpose has to be your own. And then when I look at the idea of purpose and meaning in life, I think I come back to Jay Shetty's view on it. And Jay Shetty always talks about identifying what you're really passionate about and then asking yourself, how can you use that passion in service of others? And so as I started researching more about service and purpose and meaning for life, you know, there's a lot of studies that indicate through functional magnetic resonance imaging, so fMRI technology, that when they scan the brain is hardwired for altruism. So when you do something in service of other people, you get the same stimulation and feelings that you get from food and sex.
Love that.
Yeah.
How good. So
super in depth. So it's like simple terms. When you serve other people, great pleasure comes from it.
Yeah.
So as an artist, you have like an incredible opportunity to be of service to others. And everyone has that opportunity in life. And, you know, and encourage people listening to this or watching this that I think it's really easy when you're someone who seems to fit into what, you know, you fit into a job, or you're in a job at the moment that pays the bills and allows you to support your family and your people. It's easier to feel as though, well, maybe I don't have a purpose in life. And it's not that at all. there is ways that you can serve other people and find passion in your life outside of work. Work isn't always the be all and end all.
This is the best chat. I agree.
Well, it's so important because
Yeah.
people get discouraged. And, you know, I'm very lucky. You're very lucky that we found our things early in life, which meant that we were able to pave a path for ourselves and find a way to do it really at an early stage. But I speak to people all the time who are in their 60s.
Yeah.
And they're now starting to ask themselves these questions after a lifetime of, you know, looking after a family and raising kids.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know, I feel like I never found my thing. And, you know, I feel like I haven't had a purpose. And I'm like, yeah, but maybe the greatest purpose ever is to be an amazing parent. You provided for, you know, 2 or 3 children and gave them, you know, a leg up in life and an opportunity. And, you know, you've been of incredible service to other people. But now that you're not dependent as a parent, you know, you don't have dependent children.
I think it's taking on a new role when it's taken away from you. Then you're like, oh God, what's my role now?
Yeah. And
I was the parent and now they're gone.
You've got to just ask that question. So then how can I be of service to someone else? And I love in the arts when, you know, you've spoken about on a number of occasions throughout the course of this chat, you know, writing what's true and writing what's honest. And for me, like, what great meaning and purpose you get from that, being of service to other people through vulnerability, through honesty, through a willingness to sit down and think about what would help someone else who's listening to this right now.
Yeah, and I think it's the funniest thing about music is like, you know, a song will take on so many different meanings for different people. Like, you know, I might have like one intention of, you know, what the song means to me when I write it or when I'm performing it or whatever. And then I know I meet someone else that'll come up in like a signing line and be like, oh my God, like your song, like, you know, Never in Love or blah, 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 blah. And then they'll tell me a story and it just takes on this whole new meaning for me because I was like, I never thought about it in that way when I wrote the song. So the fact that it, you know, can take on so many roles in people's lives, yeah, it's just a really amazing thing. And I think just, you know, going on about how important music is, like my trip to Africa.
I was going to ask you about this. This really intrigues me. Yeah.
Yeah. And just, you know, having like being from like 2 completely different worlds. And I didn't know what I was getting into when I went over there. I was definitely very naive. I knew that it was going to be very, very different, but it was absolutely heartbreaking, you know, being over there. But then, you know, you see these kids that can't speak English or anything like that. And I would just get up and play my guitar. They had no idea what song I was singing. And they're just having the best time. Yeah. And I think just seeing like the joy that music brings to people, it's just such a universal thing.
So what got you to Africa and whereabouts in Africa were you?
So I'm an ambassador for an organisation called International Needs Australia. And they sent me over to Uganda. Originally, we were supposed to go to Ethiopia, but there was a war happening, you know, in between those kind of few states at the time. So they ended up sending us to Uganda. But where we were in Uganda, so like Bwikwe, that was the community, and we had South Sudan right above us, and the Congo right to the left.
Yeah, wow.
And there was a war going on there at that time. So there were a lot of refugees that were coming down and fleeing those countries. But yeah, it was definitely a very, very confronting week of my life.
I bet. Well, how long ago was this?
This was 2018.
So not that long ago.
No, not that long ago. It definitely scarred me. Definitely, like, it changed me as a person. Just changed my perspective on how I live my life. And even, you know, just seeing how different like cultures live. You know, like witchcraft is a huge thing over there. And I had no idea. Obviously I knew that everyone was kind of, you know, living in poverty and things like that, but it's not only like poverty that's an issue or no access to fresh water. It's, you know, there's literally kids that are being killed every single week. And while we were over there, and I can remember I had my 23rd birthday over there, and like some of the days it was like, there's no water left. So like we'd have dinner and I'm like, okay, like I'm really thirsty, and like just kind of not
Yeah.
knowing when you're going to get a drink of water.
It changes, like you said, your perspective, but your gratitude for what we take for granted here,
Yep.
it changes everything.
Yeah. And I'm like, I need to go to the toilet all the time. I'm just one of those girls. And it was like, you'd have to go out all day. And like, when you need to go to the bathroom, there are none. Like we had, you know, the toilet that, you know, of like where we were staying. But it's like when you're going into all these different communities and things like that all day, they don't have toilets.
Yeah.
There's no toilets. Like there's no bathroom where you can just go in and turn on a tap. The water that they drink comes from like a hole in the ground, like a dirty stream of water. Like, and that's what they're drinking from.
Isn't it a challenge as an empath to be, I guess, to be opened up to that and that reality, because it's very easy to forget that reality exists when we live in the world that we do here. Like my biggest challenge today was like, I have to go and set my gear up in a very nice location to shoot a podcast.
It is a very nice location.
What a challenge.
I'm like, I love Kira Street. Actually, this is
here.
my grandmother grew up in Kira Street.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Like,
so
just
there's
down the road.
history.
Yeah.
There's history.
Love that.
That's nice. I could say that I knew that and wanted to make it nostalgic for you.
Yeah.
But you know, when you're an empath, you're exposed to that truth, that harsh reality. You almost want to feel like you want to help everyone, but it's hard.
Yeah, and like, you know, in the community that we were in, they didn't sponsor. They sacrificed one of our child-link kids. So basically it's like there's a child every single week, you know, that will be killed. And we were in that community at the time, and for us it was awful because it was like there was a kid that we'd been in here all week with these kids, and then it's like that kid's been like literally murdered, like slaughtered in front of everyone. And that was
Oh my God.
like very, very traumatic. And I was so traumatized at the time because I can remember like, you know, contacting my mom and talking to Sam, my partner, and I was just so traumatized by what I was seeing and what was happening, and just kids that are just so malnourished, and they don't have food, they don't have clean water, they don't have clothes like to wear, like they are sleeping in a dirty hut on the ground. And I'm thinking, gosh, here I am, you know, able to drive around in my car every week. I come home every night to food on the table. I can literally go to a tap. You know, it's like even if you are homeless in Australia, you still have that access to fresh water. You can go to a bubbler in a park and you've got that. Whereas seeing, you know, just basically what happens in Africa just really broke my heart. And I had a really confusing time for me because I just had, you know, like my first CMC New Artist nomination. And that was my first ever nomination. So I got nominated for New Artist of the Year. And I was flying straight from Africa to the Gold Coast. And it was my first year of presenting. And it was my first time playing the festival. So I had gone from this world of like, you know, one of our kids being murdered right in front of us, having to call the family in Australia back and be like, okay, the child who's, you know, you've been sponsoring for the last however many years has been killed. And then, okay, like now you're back into artist mode. Forget about all the Africa stuff.
So hard.
Here you go, running from the festival, you know, back to a present award, getting hair and makeup, stylist, all that kind of stuff. And I was so traumatized because
You would have been.
I hadn't like processed everything, and it was just such a whirlwind. And I can remember being at the after party, and I'm that person like that I will like talk anyone's ear off about Africa. It really changed my life and like shaped who I am as a person. I'll always have a few drinks and then have a cry about Africa. So I'm like, anyone who will listen to me, I'm like all over it. But yeah, it was just really hard for me. And I can remember just being in tears about it. And I was trying to, speak to people about what I had seen and how much of a difference sponsoring a child or a family makes. And I just kind of felt like people were always very, and like I understand completely where they're coming from, but it was always very like, oh, how do you know that the money is going there? And I'm like, for the $5 a week that it cost you, that you would spend happily at the pub or on coffee or whatever that is, to literally save a kid's life. And it's not just the child, but it's the family, whose life it saves, because it means that the kids can go to school and they get 2 meals a day when they're at school. But the kids don't go to school if they're not sponsored. So it's literally the difference between them having a meal, between them having food and not having food. And, through the program we built and the money that we raised, we built water pumps into the school so they can actually pump fresh water. So if they're not going to school, then they don't have that fresh water or food.
It's just such a reality check, isn't it? And for me, it makes it so much clearer and so present that if you are blessed enough to have the opportunities that we have in a country like Australia, just don't take it for granted.
And we do.
Oh, we so
Australians
do.
take it for granted.
We're all guilty of it at times, but it's just recognize how grateful you should be for what we have right here.
I think so. And I think, like I always say, everybody needs to go to Africa in their life, because it honestly just changes you, really, really changes you as a person. And I think you come back with such a different perspective. And like I was lucky enough to meet like my sponsor family over there. So I sponsor a family and kids every month, and being able to actually go and meet them and things like that, just it was really amazing. Like just to go and see where they live and the difference, or the small difference that I've made, just through doing that. And I still get like my sponsor letters like from the kids and things like that. And it's just it's a really rewarding thing. So I really hope that I can get back to Africa like in the next year. And I know that my fiance will be like, I don't want you to go back to Africa. But if there's anything that I do in my life, I want it to be that charity work, because, it's great to play big festivals and get like award nominations and play music. But I think as a person, the thing that really fulfills me the most is that kind of charity work.
Definitely. It's our service of others, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we'll make sure that in the show notes of today's show, there's links to the charities so people can have a look.
I did go like the long-winded version of that conversation to get back to
I love it.
the Paris service.
That's why we're here. It's all about
I'm like,
stories.
welcome to my brain. I'm like, there's 50 stories that are like intertwined into one.
All their different little compartments of meaning. Yeah. I want to dive into a part of the show that has become a little bit of a tradition.
Oh, okay.
So it's 5 questions and 5 answers. So some of the audience will be hearing this as almost a trailer to the full conversation, because it's released in 2 separate doses. Or this will be the beautiful conclusion at the end of the show for people who have been here with us from the start. So I ask 5 questions. They're usually the same, but I think I'm just going to freestyle today, and we'll just roll with
I love freestyle.
whatever comes to the top of my mind.
Okay.
So the first question would be, what's something on your life bucket list, not just a bucket list as an artist, but your life bucket list that you've not yet ticked off that you're excited about?
Shark diving. I wanted to go shark diving for so long. And my mum always tells me that I have a death wish, because I love like anything that's like, adrenaline pumping. Like I just love that kind of stuff. So that's going to be on my bucket list for this year, to go shark diving. I like it. But you know what? I would love to go to Europe and just, experience life just kind of as a normal person. I feel like all the traveling I've kind of done has always been very centered around being a musician and things like that. And I just wanted to take the time to like go to some beautiful beaches and just eat some great food and just not be the artist, if that makes sense.
Definitely. The second question I have for you is, this one may take a little bit of courage to answer.
Oh, gosh.
But I'm going to challenge you here. What's something that you'd like to achieve in the course of the next 5 years of your career that you'd like to put out and almost manifest on the podcast?
Ooh, that is a really hard one. Gosh, you stumped me.
The reason I like this question is because I found that there's something about putting an intention out to the world that almost encourages you to set it in motion. Great example, the first time I ever announced that I'd run a marathon for charity was fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
But in the same breath, it gave me a level of commitment. So I wonder, is there something in your career that you feel is the next stage for you, or the next step, a part of what you'd like to consider the next chapter?
I would love, one thing that's always been on my bucket list is to play a CMA Fest.
Yeah.
And CMA Fest is, like the American version of, the country music festival. And it is huge. And I've been at like every single CMA Fest in America. It's in the middle of summer. So I think, I would love to actually go over to Nashville as an artist during festival time, not just be there as a punter, but be there and actually play the festival as an artist. So I want to have my name on the CMA lineup.
I love it.
Yeah.
Third question is a consistent one. It's, what is the biggest challenge you've faced that's required the most growth to overcome?
Ooh, knowing that, how can I phrase this? Not being busy doesn't mean that I'm lazy. Self-care is essential, and it is okay to not work every single day.
I love that.
As I'm a shocker. I'm just like, I just feel like I need to be doing something all the time. And I know that being a musician is like, you're just always on. And it's always, there's such a hustle, like a hustle thing in the music industry where it's like, if you're not hustling or if you're not working your absolute ass off, then you're not being taken seriously as an artist. And I think it is really important to step back and be like, it's actually okay. It doesn't mean that I don't have passion for it or that I don't care about my career if I have a day off.
Well, I think at some point down the line, we got confused with the definitions of busy and productive. And I think part of being productive is looking after yourself.
100%.
Because that's the long game, right? Like if you don't have that sense of yourself, if you haven't taken care of you, then the vehicle you need to get there just won't be sustained.
And it's funny because like earlier this year, that exact thing happened to me. Like there were some months where I was like just not having any days off at all. I was working 7 days a week, just going constantly. And what actually happened was I thought I had food poisoning. And then I thought I had gastro. I wasn't sure what was happening. And basically I was vomiting for like a whole week straight. And I thought, okay, this must just be a really severe case of food poisoning. And after probably got to like the 6th or like 7th day and I wasn't getting any better. And I was at the point where I couldn't open my eyes. Like I hadn't eaten for pretty much a whole week. And my mum came over and she's like, I think I need to take you to the hospital. So they ended up taking me to the hospital. And by this point I had been coughing up blood and things like that. And we got into emergency and they couldn't, work out what was wrong with me, but I was just coughing up blood, nonstop vomiting, things like that. And my blood pressure was so low at the time. And they ended up working out that I had a really severe infection in my bowel and my kidneys, just everywhere. And it had just spread over the course of the week. And my blood pressure was dropping really dramatically. So they were trying to get me up into a ward and they'd be like, okay, yep, there's a bed. We need to take you up. And then my blood pressure would have dropped again.
Okay.
So they'd have to stabilize me again to take me up. Everything would be all ready to take me up again, and then it would drop. So I had like a few days of like, you know, where I had to stay in emergency because they couldn't take me up. And I'd been in hospital for days at this point. I ended up going into a ward, and they just could not stabilize my blood pressure. I'd started antibiotics. I'd been on them for, you know, maybe 3 or 4 days at this point, and 5 liters of drip a day.
Yeah, which is
and I
hefty.
just was not, my blood pressure was plummeting. And that was pretty scary because I think that was when I realized how sick I was, and my body just wasn't fighting it like it should have. So like I nearly went into intensive care. I can just remember all of these doctors like standing around my bed being like, okay, like this is really concerning. Like she's not getting any better. And there was kind of nothing else that they could kind of do for me. So that was definitely really scary. So I had a good 2 weeks of not being able to do anything other than lay in a bed. I literally couldn't talk, you know, and they were just feeding me endo the whole time that I was in there.
So you're not even a sense of yourself, really.
Oh,
like,
gosh,
you're
no.
so spaced out.
Oh, so spaced out. I'd like wake up, have a chat for like 2 minutes and then just go straight back to sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was too sick for visitors, and it took me like weeks and weeks and weeks, and I lost about, I don't know, maybe 7 kilos or something when I was in hospital. And it was definitely a good wake up call just in terms of, you know, not having an eating disorder relapse in that time. It was definitely a bit of a contributing factor as well as to why my body wasn't recovering the way it should have. So I'm just really lucky that at that point I had enough weight on me to basically for my organs to not shut down, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
So yeah, definitely scary. And I think it's just important to look after yourself and just be like, it's okay to have a rest day, and it's okay to like just eat the pasta.
Bloody hell.
So now I'm like, look, I'm just going to eat the pasta, and I'm like, I need to force myself to rest because I'm just
definitely
not that kind of person. But I'm like, okay, even if it's for like 4 hours a day, I'll just, you know,
a little bit of you time.
little bit of me time. Love
Even if
that.
it's just a
I probably
Netflix
sound like the
binge.
craziest person on this podcast.
No, I fully get it.
I think, you know, when you're like a creative and like when you're so passionate about what you do and you work really hard, like you kind of just do anything for it.
Yeah,
if that
for
makes sense. Like,
for sure. It's pure passion.
Yeah, pure passion.
Pure passion. I get it.
Yeah.
My fourth question to you would be, you know, in the space of music
My
and
stomach's rumbling. Love that. Sorry.
talking about food, talking about pasta. That's why. In the space of music and this creative world, who would you say are? I'm going to ask for 2 influences, right, and 2 people that you look up to in the space. One that would make sense as a country music artist, but another that would maybe be a little bit outside of the box.
Ooh,
It doesn't even have to be a musician.
that's a really hard question. I feel like it definitely needs to be a musician. I would say probably Halsey.
Yeah, okay. Very talented.
Yeah.
Incredible.
There's a lot of pop artists that, you know, you listen to and I'm like, that's just country. Like it's just dressed up in a pop production. And I think it is really interesting, you know, the way that people write songs now. I think there is a lot of country music songwriting, the way that a lot of people write. I think a lot of, you know, the greatest songwriters write country music. And it's literally just like how you decide to deliver it as to whether it's like country or whether it's pop, and what kind of production you have behind it.
Yeah.
Which puts it into that category, if that makes sense.
Do you think we're in a phase where, because people are getting very talented with production and there are many different ways to skin a cat, essentially, when it comes to music, Do you think that we're entering a phase where genres will become less of a focal point?
Yeah, I think so. I know, when I first started in country music, I can remember going to like the CMC Rocks Festival as a punter. And I'm like a teenager at this point. And I can remember like, watching Catherine Britt and Jasmine Ray and all these people that I looked up to. And I was like, oh my God, like that's just, amazing. And I never thought that, that would have been me, 10 years later, being up there on stage. And I think from that period of time to now, like the game has changed so much because there's all of these different little pockets. And I think that is because of, streaming and things like that people aren't limited to like what they hear on the radio. So It's like, if you listen to the radio, the only way that, you're going to hear of an artist is like if they come on the radio. Whereas, with streaming, it introduces you to so many different artists. And I think radio is definitely becoming less and less important. Don't get me wrong, it still has its very firm place, but I think it's changing. And I think there's all of these subgenres now that make up not just country music, but music as a whole. And like we were saying about that, like that country, like hip hop thing where there's all these people fusion that are doing like, throw it back. And then there'll be like a dong dong, like in the background. And it's like, 10 years ago, like people would have laughed at that. But I think it's amazing to like chuck a few different genres together. And if it works, then just because it doesn't fit into, a certain category doesn't mean that it's not good. If it's good, it's good.
Definitely.
And if people like it, then people like it. And that should be the biggest indicator, I think, of, breaking an artist. Like if the artist is good and they have good songs and people like it, then good. Like don't try to
100%.
change them. Don't try to fit them into a box just so other people can relate to
Just
it.
celebrate it.
If that makes sense. And I think that's a big thing with like record labels and working out how to market an artist. It's like, okay, well, there's all of these categories that we have to fit them into. What kind of category are we going to put them into?
Yeah.
And I think that's, what is changing the game up so much with streaming and things like that. You're seeing all of these huge artists now that are exploding on streaming services that don't have a record label, that, haven't had, like huge exposure or anything, but they're getting that traction on streaming because people just like their songs. So it's like at the end of the day, you can have a great record label and have all the people in the world doing whatever for you. But if your music's good and the people like it, they're going to get behind you. And I think that we forget that the people that are listening to the music are actually the biggest teachers. They're the people that you need to listen to.
Definitely.
Because if they don't like what you're doing, then they're not going to listen to it.
I love that.
Yeah. It's
Very well said.
Well, it's such an easy thing. You know?
For sure. It's in any space of entertainment.
Yeah.
That's true.
And they're the people that are like buying tickets to your show and supporting you. So without them, there's no career.
They're the currency, right?
Yeah.
My last question is a question that is a consistent one, my favorite question.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to challenge you to answer it in a different tone. So I would often ask people if you had one message that you could share with the world. The stomach is...
I'm so sorry.
Which is why it's probably a good thing that we're about to conclude this podcast, because your stomach is like, get me out of here and get me to lunch.
I'm like, I'm hungry. Sorry.
So I'll make this one quick for you. What would be your message to the world if you could encourage the world to receive this message and act on it? But I want you to wrap it up and pick a message that has been presented or shared to us in a song or lyric. So I guess let me refine that question. Ooh. Is there a song lyric that you think would encompass your message to the world?
Oh, gosh. You know what? I know exactly what this is going to be. Always stay humble and kind. It's a song by a country music singer called Tim McGraw. And the words in the song are like, hold the door, say please, say thank you. Don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie. I know you got a mountain to climb, but always stay humble and kind. And I think, that's just such an important thing, just to remember who you are and just always be kind to people.
I love it.
It costs nothing to be nice to people. And I think there's too much negativity in the world. And I think especially with Facebook and things like that, just social media on a whole, there's such a thing of like, I have the right to have an opinion. And it's like, no one's saying that you don't, but if you're going to share your opinion in a mean way, like it just doesn't need to be shared. And I always think about what the intention is behind whatever you say. Like if you're going to make a really nasty comment about someone, and especially someone that you don't know, if it's just like a public forum thing or group on Facebook, if the intention behind it is to just be nasty, then it's like you probably just shouldn't say that. That's something that you can just keep to yourself. It's fine to have your opinion, but, you know, maybe share something that's a little bit nicer, because I think, like I was saying before, that flow-on effect from just the power of words and how you treat people, I think it's just, really important to just know that everyone has their own shit going on all the time, and you might think that someone's going well, but like they might not be. So, you know, you just doing something like just saying thank you or opening the door for someone could be like the difference in how their day starts or ends. So I think, always stay humble and kind.
What a beautiful way to
I love that.
finish the show.
I wish I wrote those lyrics. I'm like, I wish I could take credit for that.
Oh, you know, put your 3% on them, you know.
Yeah, look, no.
Mix and master it in somewhere.
Prob's not going to happen. I should just send it to him and be like, here you go, Tim.
Here you go, Tim. Just a little confirmation that you're doing
Yeah.
I absolutely love that we've been sitting here for an hour and a half.
Oh my God, I know.
10 minutes.
We've actually been sitting here for longer than an hour and a half.
We have.
Because we had like an hour chat before
we had a podcast before the podcast, which is so often the case,
love it.
You know, which is great. And I just want to say thank you to you. Thank you for making music and art that means something.
Thank you. Thank you for having
being,
me.
You know, so supportive and so kind in me pursuing my dreams and what I love. I really appreciate that you get behind me. I appreciate that you've taken the time to come and be a part of the show and share your story with the amazing people who listen to and watch this show and allow it to thrive and survive. And I hope that many of your audience are here listening to this and loving the conversation too. So thank you so much. All of your links to the charity work that you do, your socials will be in the show description. So for everyone looking and seeking those things, you can find them right below. And thank you so much. I'm so excited for your future, what it has to hold. And I know that you're going to do amazing things regardless of where this takes you and what direction that you find yourself in the music space. I know you're destined for great things. So, Missy, it's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you.